Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for this session, Measuring Time, Pandemic Pursuits and Corona Clocks. The coronavirus erupted. Sheltering in place forced radical shifts in daily life, suspending work, family, and social routines. Living and working in a studio might remain constant. Still, artists face common dilemma of sourcing food, medical care, childcare, income. Even with secure personal space, how could an art practice proceed? Manage to square the artwork with the paralyzing fear of a pandemic? How could the permeating, deadly unknown be reconciled with the very notion of creative endeavor? Corners of the studio were scoured for paper, ink, old tubes of paint, even old ideas long buried by the constant rush of daily routine. A book, sitting 10 years in the studio, was taken in hand. Each day, one page turned, a visual response scrawled across the facing page. On the sidewalk, chairs marked social distance with camera recording each precious encounter. A collection of mechanical toys were rhythmically transformed into tiny sculptures sized to the constraining clock. Daily notes of paint and thought and process were recorded and attached to backs of paintings. Securing treasured family history was propelled with even greater imperative as surrounding lives vanished suddenly. Each artist found distinctive ways of transforming the impulse to work and marking time to persevere, structuring daily routines, setting time and space parameters, defending established territory, or just allowing the work to go off the rails. Each of these approaches enabled new work. Studio strivings formed a concrete present. Frameworks bolstered the practice. Measured persistence anchored the days. Renata Aller, Kim Thoman, Siobhan Nichols, and Fuad Satterfield each have taught, served in their communities, and worked in their studios. Intrepid artists. Please welcome them in turn.
Hi, I'm Renata Aller. Thank you for coming, and Jan, thank you for inviting me. I've just flown in from Germany, and I'm supposed to be right now on a panel with an exhibition that I'm in called Project Pressure Meltdown. And the curator was quite upset that I was choosing to be here instead of there. And until I explained to him that this is not a CIA conference, but a CAA conference, which I believe is not an arm of the CIA, he was kind of more relieved. I think he just misheard me. So here I am, a little bit mushy-brained. But yes, so this book that you see here, and also this was a project, Sidewalks, 6 feet apart. And for most of April and May in 2020, I've created this photo project by hosting friends and neighbors on our sidewalk or visiting them in their streets with a safe distance of 6 feet apart. And I had the camera in self-timer mode recording these encounters, which of course was easy because there were no cars, so you could have it across the street and nobody would steal it either. There was nobody there really. And the project is in the spirit of the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who wrote that each should stand guard over the solitude of the other. And I think it's just very beautiful spirit. And I didn't know at the time, when I just basically called friends and neighbors to visit me on the sidewalk, on the stoop, I didn't know that there was going to be a publication, a book, and as well, which is, you can see here, as well as the other thing was a solo exhibition at the New York Historical Society Museum. The director saw my project, and they also acquired an entire set for their collection. And Marilyn Kushner, the curator, wrote an essay in the book, as well as Laura Pan, independent curator. Now, when I created the book, I laced it. You can see it here. I laced it with something like a haiku poem style writing, which in the book kind of creates sometimes even empty spaces, which the publisher didn't think that was a good idea, but in the end he understood that, it's like in a poem or when you write a piece of music, you need to put in the pauses. And also, you don't, this is not about groups, because we were just alone, and I only really saw one person at a time. And we spent afterwards also like maybe another 2 hours just talking. So it was a genuine meeting, and the intention was just that. And the other thing is that there's a sort of performance character in the viewer of the book has to turn the pages, and by turning the pages, the engagement, it kind of creates a performance for the viewer. In the exhibition, the performance is physically by walking along the space, and the timing of the words, the poem, was sort of so that it would kind of stop you because you were reading it and then look at the image. And they were not the titles of the images. I placed them so that that was very clear. So this was the first person I called, and I just wanted to meet her. And then what happened was that actually I called her back and say, do you mind if I photograph this? Because we need to have a memory of this, because this is a situation we've never been in before. My children used to say, if mommy doesn't photograph it, it didn't happen. So that was in the spirit of that, obviously. Then I called her back again and say, now don't come in your sweatpants, like dress up as the way you see yourself when you're not in the pandemic. And she is an artist and a musician. And I said, well, what are you today? And so she came as the rock chick, which she is as well. But she's also a farmer, actually. So that's what she chose. And when I looked at this picture afterwards, I always thought that it was like the Wall of Mothers, I think it was called. Do you remember way back in the demonstrations? Because we're kind of standing there guarding somehow. And this was, of course, well before it all happened. And the guitar is the kind of like the equivalent of the machine guns that people were from the other side were carrying. And kind of, I thought it was a good symbol of, we can do it with music. But I only saw that afterwards. I mean, so that was the title, actually, of this piece, even though the writing are not titles, but this particular piece was the title. Now, so these days, I could talk to you about each of the images. By the way, they're 32, and I didn't put all of them in the presentation because I thought it might be too long. So I kind of chose a few, but a little bit random. I thought it was more interesting for me personally to think, where is this project in connection to my other works, which you can see on my website? So I have been aware of Aktionskunst, because I grew up in Germany, which is sort of based there very much, as well as Austria. And it has, the roots in the 60s and 70s. And since I was born in 1960, so I was very influenced by that period. And I never thought of becoming an artist who puts pictures in a frame on a wall. I always thought that kind of performances, I always used to do performances, things with the body. So, there were Yoko Ono's performances at the time, Joseph Beuys, and, Marina Abramovic, Judy Chicago, and, many, many more at that time. And so that they all were dealing with the relationship between the art and the viewer, subject and object, in various performance characters. So be it video, film, music, or different disciplines, merging into each other without a hierarchy. And so I never see myself as a photographer. I'm an artist who's just misusing, I guess, using photography at the moment mainly. So I was, in my early teens, I used to compose soundscapes and did a lot with body movement as well. And at the age of 16, I created a happening, which it was a breakfast. It's sort of thing Germans do a lot, breakfast on a meridian with the traffic going by, with a table set and all. So that's kind of how I grew up. And when I finished with my Abitur in Germany, where I finished with art as one of the main subjects. So my education was very shaped by, I was very lucky to have been part of a culture, and I had many friends who were in the field of Richard Long's work. Kind of, I saw him in operation and had many friends in that field. So the engagement with nature and art and space. And I always feel also that space, places are part of our cultural identity, which is like another project of mine called Heimat, is all about the loss of that. And I was talking the other day with Makeda Best, and she was talking about the destruction of space, and obviously it's usually disadvantaged people who get robbed of their spaces, or the spaces get nuked and people don't get taken care of. So my idea of our relationship to our surroundings, either be political or, so basically it's a landscape, it's the emotional, the political, and the actual landscape, which is of course the cityscape as well, is forming us, but we also forming it, of course, And so my own history of Aktionskunst was most likely the main reason for this, to start this project, because in Aktionskunst there is an intention and a concern, which then follows by action and gets then documented. So you don't really know anymore what is the artwork, is the idea, the intention, or the documentation, or the actual performance, which is gone by the time we get out from the chairs, or I always like to think about that. And Marilyn Krishna once said, you're working in series, that's how you pronounce it in English, and it's a bit like storytelling. And yeah, most of my projects are actually long-term projects and are in a serial form. And I don't really make a distinction between one project or another, but rather look at them as one body of work based on similar intentions and emerging in different forms. Just a little story. This artist, Alex Marquez, I had to visit him because he didn't have a way to come to me. He was in Astoria. And he got comfort from just sitting with me in that proximity. We didn't even talk much. And he had stopped painting. He was doing like yoga 12 hours a day, but he couldn't make art. He was very depressed. And after this picture, the next day, he started painting again. So it kind of just shows, this didn't just give other people something, it gave me the same, of course. It wasn't a selfless project, really, and my husband, who was always with me. And so the way I really think about work often is that I like to slow the viewer down to create spaces for reflection and contemplation. I also do that with my other projects. And Edward Albee, who was a late friend of mine, he always said that you have to reread a book, as Baudelaire suggested, revisit a play, your own thoughts repeatedly. When I asked him one day if he thought I was too obsessively creating work in series, I thought it was just a sort of German thing, maybe, because I did oceanscapes from one view over more than 20 years, and I like to have repetition, you know. But creating, you know, repetition is really a way for us to create memories. And to create new memories, was an important part to deal with the pandemic also. You know, it's that, you know, so this is not the picture I'm talking about now, but when Peter Stampfl, my 81-year-old neighbor, who was, by the way, like a music legend in New York in the 80s, and he still is, like, looked at from young people, very highly regarded. He had not left his house for weeks on end. And I asked him to bring his fiddle, and he played so joyfully. I mean, he wasn't even going to come outside. And when I said, hey, come outside, he just did, like, no problem. He was there. And it was very quiet, and old neighborhood friends, there was a silence, and all of a sudden, when he was finishing, there was clapping from rooftops and windows, and all his friends from the old neighborhood friends came and walked up to him in a safe distance. And, you know, he hadn't seen anybody apart from his wife. And he was just sort of, it was like a sense of reunion, a very emotional moment. And he was sort of holding court there, and he only went out afterwards, endlessly. We had to curb him a bit. So, yeah, so you could say that the meeting point morphed itself into an action, art, and a stage. Some people ask me why I write sidewalk, and my spell check always reminds me of that in 2 words, but it's actually because I wanted it to be not a noun but an action, because you are basically walking sideways away from somebody. Yeah, I should probably finish up soon now, or how am I doing? Okay, well, we're here together. Okay, good. So, yes, the sidewalk is about human nature, and it compares with nature as defined by the physical world, because we are part of nature, and it's about human nature and the emotional landscape. We are part of our surroundings, be it nature or an urban environment. We always assess where we are at one point in time to find our bearings, and we react and relate to our surroundings accordingly. That's the fiddler here, that picture, accordingly. And our relationships to space and to our surrounding is an ever-changing and adapting one. To be together in a physical space with other people is reassuring. So today, it was March 12th when we went into semi-isolation. Most of you did as well. And today is not too far away. It feels a bit like an anniversary, which is why it maybe also has a significance that we are meeting up and talking today. And so my work has always been about people and their relationship to the environment, social, cultural, or political. And one of our environments we all share is nature. This is a poem that Max Black wrote and read to me when he was visiting. And you can actually look it up on my website as well, where you can reread all these things. That's Max. And I was so honored that he came, because he's this well-known poet. And when he left, he said that I was the first interaction, and he was so glad I invited him. And I thought it was such an honor to have him at my sidewalk, even though we've been friends for like 15 years or longer. But I was very honored. But it was actually interesting to see that. And he hadn't written poems for a while. And I think an hour later, I saw him on Instagram on his fire escape reading a poem. And so it was very beautiful feeling. But yeah, I'm finishing off with, the art historian and sort of authority on abstract expressionism, Dr. David Anfam, wrote to me on Sidewalk, He said, sidewalk is wonderful. It was an email to me, so informal. You know what I thought? Roscoe's on their sides, in the most laudable, serious sense. Roscoe called his shapes actors. Of course, they have a model, so to speak, yet each is different. And each consists of different responses on the part of the actors to each other. This, to my mind, is what you achieve in Sidewalk. Without, I am sure, the slightest thought of Roscoe in your mind. And there we are, coming full circle from Aktionskunst to Roscoe. And I think that's it.
To say that Kim Thoman is unable to come to New York for health reasons, but she sends her warmest greetings from California and says, "I'm sorry to miss this event and wish I were with you." I chose Delving In as the title for my work, as that's what I did the first several years of COVID. Dig in, dig deeper, and dig wider, as a means of survival initially. Then, as a plant might begin to force its way out of the dirt, new images, new materials, and new solutions began to hatch. As a train traveler for many years, I know those long stretches between California and New York and back again. When I wasn't looking out the window, I needed to keep my hands busy by working with wire to bend, shape, twist, wrap, and glue onto any object I could find. Eventually, I settled on decorating a mechanical toy centipede. And here are some of those wired up objects made during the long train trips. Generally, the bugs would end up so heavy with wire and beads that they hardly crawled along when wound up. The poor things could barely limp along. But of course, this wasn't a problem unless some child came into the studio and wanted to play with one. Their disappointment was palpable. Kim reveals, "My daily studio time wasn't altered much when COVID hit, but the fear, worry, and forced isolation threw me for a loop, and I needed to do something with my hands, something that was familiar, easy, and comforting." Since I had bought these centipede wind-up toys in bulk, I had them on hand, and I decided to hang them and add more features. With a large-scale Epson printer in the studio to make digital prints on paper or canvas to serve as underpaintings for mixed media works or oil paintings in my regular studio practice, I had a never-ending scrap pile of test prints that was handy for finding images for bug wings. Kim then taught herself how to curl the copper sheet to make edging for the top of a wing. Let's see. Googling and buying online became a more serious endeavor during COVID. Searching arts and crafts stores worldwide, not knowing for what exactly, out of China, mesh wings for a Christmas angel that were edged in wire were found. They perfectly held their shape when squished and pinched to look more like folds, and then wired to the bottom of the now angel bugs. And getting more adventurous, collage was added to the wings. And here's a close-up. You can see that she's created an eye of her bug wings. Large drawings were scanned in the computer, they were shrunk down, and then they were printed again as collage elements. And with these malleable copper sheets, they also became elements in the bug wings. And here are images showing the way in which the copper became more and more important and of greater interest to Kim. So the crushed copper started to look like folds and became more sculptural. Another activity that many artists took on while isolating in the studio was simply straightening and cleaning up the studio. And so Kim recounts, I discovered a neon orange liquid paint that I'd never opened up. It had sat in the corner of my studio for years. Starting with an almost black and white digital print on paper as an underpainting, I freely squeezed the orange paint on the print and spread it around with a palette knife. Then worked the piece with graphite, black and white Conte crayon, and oil pastel. These works are titled Grill Revisited Series to honor a good friend who, diagnosed with cancer and given 6 months to live, is defiantly well 12 years later. Blue and green is also a liquid acrylic paint that was found in the studio and working in series. Each piece was simply titled with a number, and this is Grill Revisited 9. As you can see, all the works are 17 by 14 inches. Kim observed, the neon color had the effect of further loosening up my mark, and I let the gesture hatch out. After completing about a dozen of the mixed media works on paper, I wanted to use my freer mark making on some larger canvases. I titled this series Revisitation because they are old paintings on canvas, almost totally reworked. I'm working almost exclusively with large size oil sticks, but also Conte crayon and a bit of graphite. But she doesn't give up the orange, and here she's using large orange oil sticks. Looking back, I believe the color was a metaphor for blossoming out of our lockdown, she wrote, and feeling free enough to move away from the comfort zone that the bugs had offered. This revisitation painting was revisited over and over and over. Sometimes I wanted to go into it again with massive gestural marks. Sometimes I just needed to move on. And Kim claims this piece came so easily. The black and white marks in the upper left corner of the piece are computer lines printed as the underpainting on a previous painting. I've used these computer marks in past series as a metaphor for the witness in each of us, the witness who knows the many horrors of this world. I needed to keep some of these marks showing while letting the new life of the orange color activate the surface. Once again, the activity in the studio was focused by inactivity in the world. Digging around in old flat files, I found some prints I'd made of scanned fabric, and parts of these prints became a collage element in a new series, The Gist of It. This, The Gist of It 4, has 2 older canvases bolted together. In some meaningful way, this final image initially unnerved me. I'd been looking at images of Géricault's The Raft of the Medusa when this piece suddenly appeared to me. Kim regards this as a significant transitional piece for her work. For the first 2 years of COVID, 2 sculptural pieces hung on a wall in the studio untouched, unable to figure out what to paint in the square frames. They've become a problem. Given the title, One Wing Angel Series, they loomed, unfinished, waiting, waiting, waiting. So, working in a journal was the place to sort out this problem. And here's some gorgeous pages from her journal. Oh, let's see her working through this. Kim mused. Not surprisingly, the solution was right in front of me. Once again, folds. This time fabric scanned into the computer and scaled much larger. This brought her the appearance of a crucifixion or large bug wings. All of this she embraces. With more scanned and scaled fabric and digital work making semicircles, One Wing Angel 2 was the last to be completed. But certainly it won't be the last in this series. There will be more to come. And one more project as we moved into the light from the dark of COVID. This is the cover of an e-flip book titled Kim Thoman, 40 Years of Painting, and it's available online at Hazine and can easily be ordered and emailed out. And Kim is happy to fulfill any requests anyone might have at kim@kimthoman.com. And she also plans on a hard copy of the book. And thank you all.
What's been evident in the presentations we've already seen is that artwork still prevails, right? Art still prevails through it all. And I really do think that we are all just really trying to do the best that we can to figure things out right now. And I know for me, I've had to lean into all of the creativity I can muster up to just make it through these days, right? And I've had to adjust a lot and learn how to navigate my way through this new terrain that we're in right now, because there are just so many unknowns. We don't know when or how, and even in what ways things will change, but what we do know for a fact, and we've seen it, is that art will still prevail. So things didn't really stop for me during the pandemic. What happened, it felt like things just became more compressed, right? So my home, my work, and my studio life just compressed into this one space, right? So all the roles that I hold personally as a daughter and a sister and a partner and a mother and an active family member and supportive friend was compressed with my professional roles as an artist and an artist advocate and an artist administrator. You know, all of it just compressed into this one space. And what I had to do was to learn how to adjust and shift my expectations and find new ways of doing things and ways for working, methods for working. In the past, what I was able to do was just designate things, delineate things, and in some cases just compartmentalize things. But during the pandemic, especially the height of it all, it wasn't possible to do that anymore. And so the challenge for me was to discover really how to make it all work. So what you're seeing here on screen is really how I was trying to juggle all these things and keep it all going, right? So, a Dudene residency, working on a public art project at Beam Center in Brooklyn, and preparing for a solo exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Jacksonville, Florida. And then I was doing a special print series with them as well. But then also trying to make sure that I spend quality time with my family and my friends. And then there's remote learning, as you can see at the top right, just trying to make sure that I'm supportive as much as I can to my son. So, just trying to keep it all together and keep it going. So my segment for this panel discussion today is called Bless This House. And it is also the title of my museum exhibition that opened last fall in September at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Jacksonville, Florida, and it will be closing next month in March. So, now that I have the opportunity to reflect on what it was like to be confined to home during the height of the pandemic, I have to say that now I look back at it and it does feel like a blessing. But at the time, it did not feel like anything near a blessing. It actually felt like a tremendous loss, right? It was an extremely challenging and difficult time for me. But at some point along the way in the pandemic, things shifted for me, right? Being confined to home, I just started to reconnect, right? I wanted to reconnect with family, so I started hosting these family Zoom gatherings, and I would put in phone calls to family members I hadn't talked to for a while. And then I started revisiting family archives, right? Spending time looking through family albums, like some of the images you're seeing here on screen. And then going through some family records. And then I came across my great-grandfather's autobiography during that time and started to read that again. And then I also came across my uncle's research papers that he had written on the history of Grenada, which is where the Caribbean island that my family is from. And so I was just getting really deeply into it was like an excavation exercise into family history. And so while I'm doing this, I'm now returning to the studio. And I'm walking into this space, and my studio is a home studio, so this is an image of it here, a section of the studio here on screen. And I start looking around, and I'm seeing these two previous bodies of work. So my Provenance series and my Domiciliation series, they're in the space. And here's a slide from my Provenance print series. So this is a print and textile series, and I'm featured carrying my ancestral home. So these are like self-portraits that's depicting me kind of uprooting myself from my home country of Grenada. And so in these prints, what I'm doing here is a kind of internalizing home. And so home is now becoming part of my body and my consciousness here. Now, along with the Provenance series, I'm also looking at my Domiciliation series. And so here's an example of one of the repositories from my Domiciliation series. And these are sculptures that are kind of safeguarding my family's records and history. I'm using this clear polyvinyl chloride material that's known as PVC. That's designed for like furniture and garment protection. It's also the material that my grandmother used to use for her upholstery work. So what I'm doing here is I'm silk screening these records and these images from my family's archive, right? I'm also including like land surveys, right, from my family's home and land. And then also, if you look closely, you'll see some like handwriting. And those are actually entries from my grandmother's journal. And she's instructing the family on how to care for the home in her absence. And so this is all kind of silk screened here and housed here, all of these records and images. And I'm kind of encasing these memories and these records of my family's history into these kind of gold-adorned vessels here. And I feel like by me doing this, I'm kind of acting as a custodian of this history. And so here's just multiple views of that same repository that I previously shown. So depending on one's proximity or where you're standing and in relation to the piece, things change, right? And things start to appear and recede from view, which is kind of like how memory works. And so here I am returning to the studio, and I'm looking at these two bodies of work, my Provenance series and my Domiciliation series, and I just start seeing the work in a new way, right? And I'm beginning to re-envision the work, these two bodies of work that were created at different times in a whole new way, which now has become the Bless This House exhibition that's currently on view at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Jacksonville, Florida. So, okay, why name this exhibition and even this talk today, Bless This House? So it's actually is inspired by my great-grandmother. So Bless This House is actually a gospel song, and it was my great-grandmother, Margaret Vincent Marks' favorite gospel songs, specifically the Mahalia Jackson rendition, the 1956 rendition of this gospel song. And she passed her love for this song on to the family, to my grandmother's generation. And it was my grandmother's generation that turned this song into a family tradition. So, you know, playing this song on piano and singing it at every family gathering. And so my grandmother's generation passed this tradition now on to my mother's generation, and my mother's generation passed it on to mine. And so now here I am. I have the opportunity to pass it on to my son's generation, but I also see there's another opportunity here to share it through my work. So, you know, being home and during the pandemic and spending this time reconnecting to family and spending time tracing and tracking my family lineage. And then, of course, being in the studio and having that influence and inform the work. And again, starting to see the work with a fresher set of eyes and re-envisioning the work has truly felt like a kind of homecoming for me. And, you know, homecoming, just the concept of homecoming has really expanded for me since the height of the pandemic, because now homecoming is not only associated with a physical space, a place, or the act of returning home, it's expanded to also mean for me, you know, just having a better understanding of my history, and having a better understanding of where I live, where I come from, as well as whose shoulders that I stand on. And so, you know, this idea of coming home and grounding myself and recentering myself and then being able to make art about it has truly felt like a blessing for me. And so I want to stop there and thank you all for allowing me to just reflect and share.
Thank you very much, Jan and other panelists. It's wonderful, actually. In fact, it's always so enriching just to hear the lived experiences of your colleagues and contemporaries, you know. So I don't really have a title for my talk, except that it's about my being in and out of my studio during the pandemic time. And I also saw it as a kind of forced sabbatical, you know. I tend to be reflective naturally anyway, and it doesn't bother me if I'm not around a lot of people. So when I was looking through my images to start the talk, I saw this one. I said, yeah, in Oakland, we stay home to stay safe, to save lives. And I thought that was appropriate. I have my two little munchkins, Sadie and Fred. Fred is transitioned, so we still have Sadie. She's 17 now. And it's a ritual, you know, to take them out each day, 3 times a day minimally, you know. And you get to see and feel, you know, what's going on around you, particularly during that time. You know, people were rather afraid of being too close to one another. And it was a little strange at first, but then I got to understand it. And then the little dogs sort of created a kind of dog diplomacy among other people who were walking their pets, you know. And I got to meet more people in the community, in the neighborhood, actually. So that was really very rich. Oops, that's the right one. Oh, there, sorry, wrong. This image, this outdoor image is on a hill overlooking a part of the bay. In fact, probably Jan's studio is right down the on the land there. It's El Cerrito bulb, we call it. One of the advantages of having my studio in Emeryville, which is right between Berkeley and Oakland. You know, the Bay Bridge is there in San Francisco. It's called the East Bay. Jan is right down the way from me. And there's this Bay Trail, where literally you can circumvent the entire bay now. just either cycling or walking. And from here, from my studio, I can actually walk to the Emerville Marina or the Berkeley Marina. And that was really huge because I stopped driving, and I would, each morning, my ritual would be to leave early and walk to the Emerville Marina, about 1.3 miles. And there was no one out. So I had the whole place to myself. It was really quite wonderful. And then I started journaling. And I'd never really had done that before. And I had this one little bench that was sort of framed by these two cypress trees. And I went there every day, and every day I would just speak to what was coming up for me. What were some of the questions and inquiries and some of the things that were bothering me. And it was always the same question that I would bring to the bench was, what am I supposed to do? What's for me to do in my work, in my practice? And always the same answer would come to me. Fuad, go to your studio and make the most magnificent works you can. Works that will contribute to a healthy, equitable community and also in the world. Oops. So during this time, I just started going outside and collecting dead branches and things and bringing them in to the studio and just actually playing. I put away what I call all my serious work and just started experimenting, and allowing myself to do things that I probably hadn't done since third grade when I learned how to cut from a cardboard stencils and then with a heavy brush to kind of stencil material. That was the beginning of my art odyssey, actually. My third grade teacher, she saw I was in trouble. I wasn't a very good student, I was behind and everything. And so she would let me go in the back of the room and she taught me how to do this. And that started the whole thing. So I remembered that and I said, let me try that again. So you see on the wall are some of the stencils that I made. I didn't expect them to go anywhere. In fact, I went outside in front of my studio and they were going to put a no parking post. And I didn't want that. So what I did was I took the stencils and I stenciled over where they had marked the sidewalk so they couldn't find it. And luckily they put it in another place. So that was nice. Here again, just on the floor, just having fun, just kind of playing. I pulled out a lot of old paints that I hadn't used and why not, And I love cardboard, by the way. I think it's one of the most useful materials that we produce. There's just so many purposes for it. So I use it as a carpet on my cement floor in the winter, and it keeps cuts the moisture. And I use it for packing materials and just separating artworks and so on and so on. So I use it for everything, pallets, you name it. And it's free because everybody's throwing away cardboard, This is one of my refuge places, I call it. This is in Tilden Park, right in the Berkeley Hills. And it was another place that I would go almost every day. Here I would have to drive, though. And there was Jewel Lake was there. It was just this little tiny reservoir of water, but it would be the host to turtles and birds and just really sweet. And no one was ever there, And so it was really my place. I made this my place. And I would just go and just kind of sit and just reflect. And for many of you, a little bit about my history. I've been a serious meditator and contemplative person for many, many years. And so this was wonderful, you know. And I believe in trying to access as best I can my intuitive voice, which is way above the intellectual, you know. But you've got to quiet that voice to let it come up, you know. And often what I find is that in contemporary postmodern culture, the distractions are so extraordinary in terms of how they keep you outside of yourself that it's difficult, it's almost impossible to find that space. You know, and I can only imagine here in New York City, but I'm sure it's possible. You know, so this is one of the places, and this is another view of it. I also got to see that things that bothered me and that I were not clear on. I realized that I would just let them out, and they would kind of bounce around on the surface of Jewel Lake, but they would never be absorbed in it, you know? And then I got to see that these things that I were carrying really were just, they really weren't real things at all. You know, nature would not accept it. The living world would not take it in, would not absorb it. So therefore, I had an option of holding on to it or letting them go. And that was huge. These burdens, you know, the life burdens, the artistic burdens, the questions, the trepidations, you know, we have, the insecurities, you know, all of these things. So back in the studio, these I call my my COVID series, because these 4 paintings, there were many more, but these are 4 paintings that I painted over and over and over again. In fact, under each one, there's at least 7 paintings on each one. I just never felt satisfied or that they could actually ever be complete. And rather than just stopping and starting another thing, I felt compelled to go back into the work and try to articulate a little further. It's not unlike what you said, Renata, you know, about when you visit certain things, different times, different occasions, you feel different about it. You bring a different perspective. So these were really almost laboratory experiments for me, because I got to see here what I probably should not do as I go forward. And as a result, these are probably the most important paintings I have in my collection right now. And I constantly go back to them to remind me of how you kill something. You know, how do you overthink it, over-intellectualize it, you see? Now, this is, you know, kind of big view here. And this is another view of another walk I would take. It was called the Huckleberry Preserve, and this is in the Oakland Hills, right next to Berkeley. I mean, the wonderful thing about the East Bay is that we have these hills, and these hills are these great parks, and there are trails all through them, primarily for fire trucks when there are fires. But as a result, we are able to use them as just walking trails. And there's this one place where the trail comes and you see this vista. And here is Mount Diablo. We have 2 mountains that embrace us. One, Mount Diablo in the East Bay, and then Marin, there's Mount Tamalpais. You know, guardians, you know, goddesses, in fact, you know, that sort of hold us in check, a kind of equipoise, you know, for the living world, you know, if you're sensitive to it, you know. And so this would always remind me of just how grand and how dynamic this whole thing is that we're in. We call this this living world, this nature, this world, and how fragile it is. And I think that was also the thing that really made me even more committed to doing this work, particularly in the kind of work I do in my paintings, is that the fragility of nature, of the living world, and how to protect that and bring that to the consciousness of the largest audience possibly can. So my goal with my work is to try to find avenues and venues for the largest audience possible, to achieve what I'm trying to do, which is basically to just make individuals and communities more aware, of the impact they could have. Just another view of just slowing down with the streams that are going into Jewel Lake, and creatively, artistically, pictorially seeing what the possibilities are. I tend not to use figuration in my work. There's a reason for it. I want to liberate the viewer in a lot of ways to just basically to find their own place. So I try to use motifs, natural motifs in that regard, to tell the most difficult stories, And so I see the entire story in these various little scenarios and how I interpret them, and then determining the scale, because I think I'm always trying to make work that configures with the human scale. What size or thing interacts with the human form in such a way that when you look at something, and you embrace it, how does scale play a part in this? So scale is important in my work, and I try to basically to match the human scale with the pictorial scale. So there's a reason for that. And this is a painting that basically was directly influenced by this particular genre in this time, 7248. So you see it's right kind of human scale size, just big enough, not to overwhelm you, but just big enough to stop you. And if there's something for you or some interest there, so be it. And this is from a flow series. Basically, it was just the way, not a waterfall, but just a little trickle, the way the way water was moving. And what's really quintessential in all my work, in fact, is water. What is water? Water is, it's life. It's transformative. It's a cleansing element. It's one that, without it, we would not be able to be here. So symbolically, it's a very powerful, dynamic element that I try to infuse with it many of the angst of our time and the kind of human queries that we're dealing with, and conundrums, and so water and land, water and earth, even to be more fundamental, mud is very important for me. I see the whole world. I see the whole history of humanity in the earth, in the mud. Another variation. And this is horizontal, 48 by, I think it's 96. I wanted this format and this painting to operate in a particular way. I wanted this to be more of a narrative. So I tend to go to the horizontals for that. Again, trying to slow the physical body down just a bit, And with this painting, I thought I had finished it, and then a couple of years later, I decided to go back and to articulate other areas. In fact, it felt more comfortable, but it was a difficult process. And I thought I was going to do a much larger version, but I didn't. But there was another thing I did. And this is a study for a very large diptych that I intend to do at some point. Again, drawn from Jewel Lake. a larger version. The first and second units are not together here. The painting on the left is a diptych. In fact, that now is in the permanent collection of Xavier University in New Orleans. I gifted that painting to that institution in memory of my mother, Lily. That was the name of the diptych. And also, I wanted historic African American college to have a painting of mine, and particularly in Louisiana, where I'm from, you know. So that was an important one, you know, and it was really a good piece. A bad photograph, I apologize, but and the unit next to it is part of a larger diptych that you'll see in the next slide, I think. And this was also Jewel Lake, and this is the first fairly large diptych I done that was 60 by 96 panels together. And this is the actual diptych. In September of last year, I had an exhibition at the Mellon Gallery here in New York, and the diptych was in the show. But you can see here we actually separated the units because actually I felt that it needed a clear separation, and I think it could work either way. In fact, these paintings, they can be seen upside down, and they work. They were made to have that versatility, because when I make them on the floor, and I'm circumventing the painting. So up is down, down is up, left is right, right is left. And it really doesn't matter, but there is an orientation. The painting on the left, that painting was acquired by the Crystal Bridges Museum from that show. In the studio, working on another diptych that went into a later exhibition in San Francisco, and we were able to place that piece as well. But again, you know, the theme is pretty. I stay with a kind of a location and theme that's pretty constant, but I try to vary it as much as I possibly can. You know, given the context of the internal narrative within the pictorial space that I'm trying to create. And I'm not really sure, never really sure, what the painting will demand once I begin the process. This is just a gallery shot at the Studio Shop Gallery, where I'm affiliated with in the Bay Area. It's in Burlingame, California, right next to Palo Alto. The diptych on the right, it's a very interesting piece. We placed that in. It was a difficult painting. It was a hard painting to work with, to visually, but it was deep. It had a great resonance, I thought, and I was striving for something there. You know, the paintings I make, I've got to like them. I've got to think that they're important. I really don't make them for the audience. I really don't. But however, if the audience can resonate with them, so be it. Okay, the one on the right. The left, that's a study for a larger piece, okay? And often what I do now is that I try to liberate myself by doing studies, 3 stages, a very small one, maybe a 48 by 48, maybe a 60 by 60, and then to see how far I want to go up, or whether the painting can demand or carry a larger scale. It may not, and I certainly don't want to force it on the painting. The idea is that, does it communicate what I'm trying to express? Just another trail, another possibility for me. You know, when I'm going uphill to my destination, I just see so many possibilities, visual possibilities, and I see so many stories. I see people I've known in my life that are no longer with us. I can see them, you know, and I just imagine them. And so, for me, it's this kind of amazing place that where the imagination is infinite. And to me, it's a freedom that I think that when we make work, this is what we strive for, isn't it? You know, how can we liberate ourselves from, any limitations? You know, art being this absolute, total political thing we do, because it's, when you make a beautiful thing or something that's absolutely engrossing and demands your attention, that's a powerful thing. It's a powerful social statement. And I think you can do it. For me, I choose to do it through the living world. And this is another fairly large painting from those walks. This is from the Barbara Garden series. And this painting is in my studio. I need to keep this painting because it's almost like a kind of Rosetta Stone for me. It had everything I strived for, and of course, the paintings are made to be texturally powerful, so you need to be able to get close to it. They're sensual. They're made to actually stop you and make you feel something, And this is the last image. This is up on in the trails with my grandson, Cairo. And I must say that during that time, we started to do these walks more than we ever had before. And they were just absolutely extraordinary and so memorable. And I hope that he'll remember this, as he gets older. And because, often I think it's a generation removed who will be the ones who will be the custodian of what we do. Thank you.
I actually had lots of questions prepared. I think that's our only mic. Maybe that's what we need to take. We can hear you. I want to record it. That's why we have the extra slide. But I also want you all to be able to ask questions of each other, which I'm sure you have. But I have just one general question of everyone, and that is, was there something that was different and new that came to you that you found and discovered in terms of your work and your practice in the studio during this period that you want to continue, that you are going to continue? And on the flip side, is there something that you fell into or that constricted you that you're very happy to get beyond at this point? I'm really interested in what you were able to draw from this, if there was something that was really constructive or stimulating that you hadn't just known or realized before that you were able to that you want to carry forward. And of the other side, is there something that you're happy to leave behind?
I have, and my immediate reaction is also what somehow all of us are pointing out, is what I learned or reconfirmed was that slowing down is important. We're living in a very fast world. We are in quite a terrible world, and we can't be victimize ourselves from what is happening around us. Whether it's the same horrible thing that was before or after, doesn't really matter. We mustn't victimize ourselves. But the slowing down is important. And you were mentioning that, slowing down the gaze, and also like focusing in on, let's say, ourselves, meditation, our family, and make less things more important rather than a lot of things, which is also in the work, right?
Yes.
To sort of, I find that we all kind of been talking about that. And the other thing was also how scale is so important. So you had a beautiful notion. We all were talking about the scale. And in some ways, when you lose scale, because even all our works are sort of like pretty direct, but there is an abstraction somehow in it. And I always believe that when you abstract something and you lose, that's when you lose a sense of scale. But it actually makes you abstraction makes you closer to what you're looking at. Because you need to search, where am I in this image? It's not so obvious, And so we, I have so the idea also of sort of something being tactile and the scale, and the other word was transience, which in German is Vergänglichkeit, which is so much more beautiful as a word, and it has more meanings actually. It's a sort of sense of loss, but not the celebration of loss, more the being aware of it. I have much more to say, but like,
Right. With the passage of something that it is lost to you, it is in the past, and it is not a continuum.
No, but it's a part of memory. I mean, my current book is the space between memory and expectation, and that is actually like I created this during the pandemic, that alongside this project, and that is actually that space where there is apparently nothing. That's where change happens, which is what you do with meditation.
Yeah, well, just to speak of memory and how I think about it, there is useful memory and there's memory that doesn't serve me well. And that was the thing that I was saying about, I realized that I would actually write out what was happening, what was I kind of conflicted with. I mean, I believe I'm like a carpenter, I'm like a pictorial carpenter. I believe in writing it out so I can see it. I need to see it. I need to get it outside of me. Then I could actually look at it objectively, and when I would take it outside, and I would read it out, I'll say, does this have relevance for me or not, or is this something I'm just carrying that doesn't really serve anything? So so to answer your question, Jan, what I started dropping off were things that were not useful anymore.
And people.
And well, of course, well, yeah. Well, I mean, now you're right, and then of course my philosophy, from a Zen Buddhist, a Vedic point of view, and also just from a humanist point of view, is that you don't have to. If someone is not doesn't treat you well, you don't have to like them, but at least I'm going to give them a certain level of kind of courtesy at the human level. But I don't have to be their friend. They don't have to be my friend. Because lots of people, disagree with me and I disagree with them, but I try to still treat them in such a way that basically there's a connection. Because I never want to lose that connection. So I think that's a kind of,
For me, I realized because I'm holding so many things and I've gotten used to just doing 100 things at a time, and even though I'm capable of it, it's not necessarily good for me. I don't want to be great at holding so many things at once, and I'm realizing that I actually have been compromising my practice to accommodate all the things I'm holding. So I've moved away from working in sculpture and like working large as I used to, and because of the immediacy of the way I need to work and the lack of time, I've just found another way to make work to accommodate that. But as soon as I'm able to slow down, here I am now moving into public art, right? And I would not have gotten there without that. And now I'm working even larger than what I thought I would, and collaborating with fabricators in a way, I wouldn't have if I didn't get forced to actually slow down and actually let a couple things, take a couple things off the plate. So I think I can't necessarily go back to that. I don't want to, but also I want to continue to explore what it means to continue to just keep taking up space with the work that I'm making, right? And going larger if I want to,
but also being able to work smaller if the work calls for that, but not because of time or all of these other demands why I'm working this way. But I'm making that choice because I want to make that choice, not the conditions.
I thought it was extraordinary when you talked about the whole definition of home for you, Sherman. And what I discovered during COVID was that what made home for me was taken away, because so much is about having people come in. Because I live alone, people always come in. I have people in all the time, and suddenly there was this structure that only held memory, and really was not of the present. It was just, just the opposite. I think for most people, the home became just the whole world, right? You had your son's education and school coming in, and the teacher was suddenly living with you every day, and everything was in your home space. Just the opposite. But also, I found it really interesting, Renata, the impact that your activity and your project had on the lives of all these people who were so affected that it could shift their whole experience of the pandemic for them. And that was really, really extraordinary. So,
But you know what's interesting is that I thought only the people who I photographed and who visited me physically, that there was, something happening and all that. But there were as many people that I had called to just check in, and they were not comfortable to come into the streets. But it was as important. So the fact that somebody's in this book doesn't make it more important. Just the act of reaching out. And the other thing we probably all experienced was we did not waste phone calls to people that didn't mean that much to us. We had so much time, but for some reason we didn't. And I think that's also, I didn't miss everybody I knew. And it's more genuine. And I found Jan.
yes, we found each other. We found each other during the pandemic online.
Really?
So this morning was the first time we saw each other physically.
Really?
We touched each other for the first time.
Not online like Tinder. It was
No, no. No, it was an artist
studio community.
Yeah,
studio visits,
Yeah.
online studio visits.
Yeah.
It does. So just this right here is a model of what was the outgrowth of COVID.
Yes, very,
Right?
yes. So, one thing that Fuad and I have is a breakfast group of artists. And these artists, well, not these particular artists, but they started meeting, this group started in the 1960s and has continued over the years with new people joining, many have passed. But we have been having breakfast together for many, many years, every Friday. And what I did during the pandemic, which speaks to what you said about the limitations of our phone calls and connections, is that I invited 3 of the other members to come onto Zoom with me every Friday morning. So it was just the 4 of us having conversations. And again, it's trying to find something a bit deeper and more resonant.
Jen, I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, because those Friday Zoom meetings that we would have were just absolutely so important. It was almost like, oh wow, it's Friday, so got to get up and have the coffee ready, and, because we're going to do our Zoom meeting. So it's something we look forward to, because it was so essential, just keeping the conversation and the community, and it was good,
And a sense of time, because
yes.
it's a week.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, and Jan was great in organizing it, like she's done with this panel, inviting me here. Thank you very much, Jan. So, you know, but it was just, it was so rich. And a lot of our peers didn't have that. They didn't have that, you know, and I could see that they were really longing for a kind of community and a kind of communication in a way. And even just with people that were not necessarily artists, but just individuals, basically. How do you negotiate all of a sudden this thing of being isolated? You know, I mean, people had a very difficult, I mean, as you know, in your various community, it was really a rough time.
And also, talking through the bus, it's like talking to a person hard of hearing. You have to choose what you say.
Yes.
And you can't just blubber away.
That's
and
right.
you also have to listen.
Which is a good thing.
You stop and listen.
Yes.
But about this once a week, I heard in a podcast, maybe it was on Being, I don't remember, she's really quite good sometimes. There was a woman who was a rabbi, and she said that Shabbat, even if you're not religious, but the idea that on every Saturday you would go, oh, we survived another week. And we had a bubble with an artist couple that we decided to be very careful, you know. We met Saturday, but we didn't meet Friday. We met Saturday and not Sunday because we needed to, otherwise one week goes into another. We needed to define those things, especially living just the two of us in one space.
I think of all the old B movies where there's somebody in prison marking on the walls, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1,
That's
2,
right.
3, 4, 5. And if you don't have any kind of external marker, any kind of external contact that is, you know, checking in and actually at regular intervals, I think, and I'm happy to free float in the studio for a couple of days and not walk out and be absorbed by my work, and that's fine. And not to open mail and not to do anything. It's very easy. But if you were to remove that completely, right, you see how disorienting it is for people, and how it really, I mean, we're animals, we need these cycles, we need the seasons, we need the clock. Yeah. And it's very interesting to see how we make them up. And I thought a little bit about pregnancy and how with pregnancy you're marking time very clearly, right? You've got your weeks and your first month and your trimesters, and then you're back to counting your days again. I just found that during this time I kept setting things up for myself, thinking they would carry me through. So something was like 50 days, something was like 100 days, and then I'd have to come up with something else to set the clock, to reset the clock.
Well, I loved your discipline with the book, where you only opened the page. You didn't look through the whole book and then chose to react to an artwork in the page. It's my favorite. I love that. But you actually just had the discipline of opening the one, and then you would react to that. And that's how I also looked at them when you sent me the book. I only looked at one per day, and I never looked through the whole book in one go. It's the sort of set of discipline, and I think that if you set yourself disciplines and structure, you can go wild within that structure, rather than that sort of endless horizon of freedom, which as artists we sometimes sort of have, especially ones without children. You know, so to not just sort of drift into some, you know, abyss.
I also needed the pleasure of something to look forward to, of something that I knew would be new and different for the next day. And it's a little bit like an advents calendar. I mean, no child wants to open up every little window on the advents calendar and know what's there for the whole time. You want to have the pleasure every day of seeing something new, right?
Did you all have diaries? Like journals?
I did.
I did.
I had a few. Yes, a few different types.
I don't keep one.
You see, I have a 10-year diary, and I've always had it. So I can look back what I did last year at this time, or in 2020 today.
I have a friend who can quote exactly what we did on a day in a year like that, writes every night, but I've not done that. I always felt when I was a kid and I'd get a new diary and I'd be excited, I always felt like I had to catch up and put down what had happened before so that it would be understood what had happened today.
No, I think it's good to do it for yourself and not for others. Pretend it's all private, and that's sort of a bit also like doing artwork. You know, when I started this project, this was not an artwork. It was just doing something, and I photographed it. And obviously there became a structure. I made sure I always wear black because this is easier. Somebody suggested it was because of death. I'm like, no, as artists, we wear black anyway. It's not to do with death, you know? And I think that's important to allow things to happen. And of course, your intellect, if you work with intuition, it helps a lot. But of course, you know, however old we are, like 60 or, you know, younger or whatever, that's the many years of intellect that will filter through anyway. You don't have to sort of press it onto the artwork.
Well, I definitely had clothing that I thought was just COVID clothing and that I would burn at the end like maternity dresses.
Did you?
I had things that I would just, like, I only wore certain things, yeah.
I dressed up.
Yeah.
No, because it's like, hey, what? You know, get out that gown, wear it with trainers. It's a good look anyway. Walk through Soho where nobody knows you.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what you said about the journal, and I don't approach a journal where like I write every day, and I do have different journals for like the things I'm working on. So that's how I've been approaching journal entries, like not every day, but it's the things that are happening, things that I want to make sure to capture and remember and return to at some point. And they address like certain things I'm working on in the studio, or things that I, you know, have going on in my personal life, or things I'm dreaming up, because there's also that space where I like to dream up the things that I want to do and return to them and see.
It's also like when you look back at a year ago, you can sort of go, wow, I've come a long way. That used to be a cigarette ad, I think. We've come a long way.
Absolutely.
But you remember that I don't really put too many negative things in. Because I want to go, and it's all about me. It's not really about you know, children or this, that, maybe a bit, but it's just all about me. And I kind of look at it and I can say, oh wow, a year ago I had a Zoom call with Jan or something, and I go, isn't that nice? It's a sort of little pat on the shoulder, and a simple word sometimes opens up a whole library of visuals.
Oh yes.
You know?
Oh yes.
Actually, again on your work, by the way, I don't know what this project is called, but you had sort of had these enclosures, transparent.
Oh yeah, the repositories, yes.
Right, and they kind of, in some way, they felt like they were keeping something like this.
Yes.
I don't know the word, but you know what I mean.
Safeguarding.
But yeah, but also a little bit like not allowing it out, but at the same time it's also protecting. So it was the two opposite languages that were there, and I think that's sort of us as human beings, because on one hand we want to stay where we are and protected and safe. On the other hand, we want to be at that next point where we don't know if it's good or bad or what. But the yearning between those two makes us human beings.
Yes. That's a
And I
good
love
word.
that language.
That's a good word for yearning, because I feel like a lot of the work is about this longing, yearning,
Yeah.
you know, kind of carrying some of the things that you pick up from your family and you carry, and you try to figure out why you're carrying this. It's not yours to carry, but you do. So a lot of the work is about trying to understand what it is I need to let go, what I need to hold on to and bring forward.
Yeah.
And so the work is always in that space.
And I feel also
between.
that, because I don't know your family or your history of, you know, like that well, but I felt I could relate to that as well. I couldn't just look at it as your life,
Yes.
but I immediately felt that I was looking at from my side too. wish I kind of done now. They're really good work. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. And,
Well, you talk about journals, but I mean, I have sketchbooks. I have like hundreds of sketchbooks. And to me, it's the same thing. I mean, I can look at, I can turn a page, look at the drawing and know exactly what happened on that day. and
no, I
what's
sometimes
happening.
those spaces too.
I sometimes just stick something in there with a date, a piece of paper. I think the idea of having, it's really like having a rhythm. It's like having a rhythm of your existence, you know? Because it's so hard sometimes to find time, especially in pandemic, where the time go, like it's compressing and expanding, and it's a bit like breath. And you know, there's a currently, or they just closed in Hamburg. There was an exhibition called Atmen, Breath, and it was in honor of George Floyd, and obviously not just him, but him as a symbol for everybody. And it was called Breath, basically breathing. And Jenny Holzhaus, I think, there was a great one. But there was one piece in that exhibition which was a granite, a big piece of granite, and I didn't realize until then, because I've worked with granite, that granite is compression of air. And so in some ways, I thought it was very meaningful. And in some, this exhibition really described for me a lot about the pandemic, about inhaling and exhaling, compressing and expanding. What is our time?
I don't know what our time is. Oh my gosh.
Oh, we're over.
We're over. I had no idea. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm fine, and obviously
Well, thank you all.
there's obviously